Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yurachek.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Angelique Johnson, and she is the founder and CEO of MEMStim, which is a maker of implantable electrode leads, providing targeted electrical stimulation to highly dense and small nerve fiber groups. So it basically sounds like you're doing this contract engineering for a lot of other companies and making the actual electrodes and devices for a lot of neurotechnology companies. Yeah, so Angelique, pleasure to have you on the show. Do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
Yeah, sure. Angelique Johnson. I hail from University of Michigan. That's where I got my PhD in electrical engineering there. That's also where my journey with microelectrode arrays started in Kenzel Wise's group. At that time, I was working on a cochlear implant electrode. We were focusing on, as many do in the space, trying to get as many electrodes as possible in a small area. And for our application, the thought was more electrodes would lead to a better resolution of sound, as those electrodes were stimulating the auditory nerve, which had a lot of receptors on it. Turns out that maybe the jury's out on that. And as a result of that work, I realized that more electrodes wasn't necessarily the issue in terms of adoption of microtechnology in the clinical lead space, particularly cochlear implants. It was really the inability to build a robust substrate, both with the metal materials and the polymer materials, that could survive in the body for long periods of time and also withstand common surgical implantation techniques. And so I founded MEMStim to really go after that challenging area of making a robust yet flexible, not flexible in mechanical sense, but flexible in design feature sense, manufacturing process for making electrode arrays and electrode leads, specifically in the neurostimulator space, but also can be used in wearables.
Wow, fascinating stuff. As we talked about before we started recording, this is very similar to what I'm doing my PhD work on. So you're speaking my language. And before we go into the founding of MEMStim, I want to talk about the fabrication of cochlear electrodes, because those are famously kind of snail-shaped, a spiral shape, and microfabrication is planar. It's very much, you're doing it on wafers, flat wafers. So how did you do that? It sounds like you're trying to make a 3D structure out of a 2D thing. Did you just get really good at origami, or how did you do it?
So they have a few different types of cochlear implants, and some are spiraled. And so when I was doing my dissertation work, we would put, bimetallic layers in there to pre-curve it so that when you release it from the wafer, it spiral up. And we do things to tailor the degree of curvature and all kinds of stuff. And then we actually put Parylene microfluidic channels on the back, because even with the currently used cochlear implants that are assembled by hand, they're spiraled. Some of them are spiraled, certain models, but then they have a channel going through it where you can put a stylet wire to straighten it out. So we were, again, trying to mimic that construct, but at a MEM scale. On the other hand, there's a lot of cochlear implants that are straight. And so at MEMStim, we do mostly straight cochlear implants in terms of what we're concluding out on our R&D side. Curved cochlear implants, even on hand assembly, they get their curvature through injection molding. And so for us, if we want curvature, we can do injection molding. Certainly we could 3D print it curved as well, if that was the desire. But it turns out there's a lot of interesting things that happen when you're thinking about how neurostimulators work and what really works, what doesn't work, and where the jury is at on different things. So curved versus non-curved, depending on who you talk to, it doesn't matter. Depending on who you talk to, is everything. So we really try to design a process where if you want a curve, we can make it curved. But if it's flat is what you're saying, then we do flat as well.
Wow, that's really cool. Okay, so you had this idea after your PhD thesis. You had another thesis. You're like, okay, we need a better, more robust substrate. So yeah, tell me about the founding of MEMStim. Like, why did you do this? And to found a company is pretty crazy, and especially in the nanofabrication space. And these are you're using very expensive tool, and the capital expenditure is really high. So why did you do this, and how did you do this? And yeah, what was the story?
Yeah, a lot of ignorance. If I could go back in time. No, I'm just playing. Actually, if I could go back in time, I would have done things differently. You're right. Trying to start a MEMS company where MEMS has a great track record outside the medical space in terms of long-term implants. Obviously, it's used in medical devices that aren't unpackaged in close contact to internal structures of the body. But when you're talking about having MEMS devices directly in contact with nerves, neurons in a fluid environment and all of that, okay, trying to build that type of technology using the standard MEMS manufacturing facility that you just mentioned with all this equipment, the way it's built out is not really designed. The material choices that we use are not really designed for that. So when I started out, I naively, just not knowing, was like, okay, but we can build in the lab and we can put in some animals and we'll make it out of parylene. That's polymer and that'll work. And they use parylene in medical devices because I can find some literature reviewed publications that reference that. But then when we actually talked to the medical device manufacturers, when we actually, started thinking about how do you actually make a platform that can be used in a clinical space, we found out that a lot of the materials that we were using on the MEMS side that may have been suitable, okay, for animals and good enough to make prototypes in a lab setting just weren't suitable for clinical use. And furthermore, there's not a lot of medical device companies that have full-scale clean room facilities with microelectronics processing tools and all that. So a lot of them have clean room facilities, but they're clean room facilities that are using different tool sets that we use. All that goes to say, the heavy capital expenditure on equipment in microfab does not necessarily translate readily to our customer base. So we threw all that out in a way and just thought, am I doing this because it's where I came from? If I was going to start from scratch, what would be the most ideal? And we thought the most ideal thing is instead of trying to meander lines and bimetallic metals and all kinds of things, pre-stretching PDMS and printing on top of that, instead of all these things that we try to do to make something small and thin, elastic and durable, what if I could just elastic, durable materials, including metals, and just build it up with the smallest number of tools possible. And that's how we ended up really transitioning to this concept of where we're at now and really redoing all of our previous R&D work where we're looking at printing of microelectrode arrays, where we're making our own elastic inks and using both conductive and non-conductive materials. To do that have a real track record for long-term implant materials that we can purchase that are literally already pre-vetted and qualified as long-term implantable. And so that's what we said, how do we put down the materials that we want to put down, even if we have to abandon everything we know about microfabrication tool set.
That's interesting. You might have to change the name of your company from MEMStim to, 3D printed stim or something like that. And does that mean you are moving away from the clean room? Like you don't need it, or you could even have a clean box or 3D printer or something like this and get rid of the whole clean room altogether?
Yeah, we mostly more so on the R&D side, a little, not too much on the production side, because we are still nearing the end of our R&D phase. But we do use some things like spinners and things like that. But the end game is, we would just have, like you said, a clean room in a box. In fact, in our lab right now, we have just a modular clean room that we, do work in when we want to be in an environment that's well controlled and things like that. But so that's definitely it. Being able to reduce that tool set is super critical. And then being able to just make it how you want to make it without having to do maybe 15 different processing steps and a lot of challenging design parameters and designs built into the device to get it to where you want it to get in terms of mechanical and electrical performance. So that we're trying to eliminate those burdens, but of course you get other burdens. You can never escape the innovation challenges.
So is this where you see the future? I mean, do you agree with everybody else? Is this where you see the future you're going to, more these 3D printed versions versus wafer-based stuff, or what?
I think it really depends on the application, because if I could use the materials that you traditionally have in a microfab facility, if I could use silicon semiconductor wafers to make something, if I could even use parallel, if I could use polyimide, I think there's still a very strong place, and there's great advantages to microfab. Batch fabrication, I mean, it's beautiful in that you could make hundreds, thousands, depending on the size of something all in one run. And 3D printing, you do lose that to a certain, you have to do other tricks and things to get that, at least with some of the ways that we're doing it. Although people are trying to address even that challenge of 3D printing to do large scale batch fabrication, but there's a lot of beauty to what microfab can do. So I wouldn't say that 3D printing solves everything. I wouldn't say that traditional microfab solves everything. I think there's a place for each in the market.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. And I think definitely, as they say, like the kind of the 3D printing is really good for prototyping, but then maybe once you get to scale, like if you have to have 100,000 devices, then a lot of times 3D printing can be very cumbersome because it's a serial process. Hey guys, just a quick pause to talk about our show sponsor, Iris Biomedical. Iris Biomedical provides a portfolio of neural sensing and simulation platforms and components to accelerate early-stage medical device companies through preclinical and early feasibility studies. Iris is an ideal partner for companies with limited budgets or resources to invest in developing a new platform from the ground up. Their experienced engineering team, in-house cleanroom facilities, and ISO 13485 certified quality management system allow for prototyping and early-stage commercial production. Be sure to tell them you heard about it on the Neural Implant Podcast. That'll really help us out. Thanks. Now, back to the show. So who are your customers right now? And to the extent that you can, maybe they're super secret, NSA or something like this, but what kind of companies do you service? And are they also doing this research? And yeah, what's that look like for you?
Yeah, so we have to grow with the interests of customers. So because we don't have the advantage. So to make it clear, our true competitors are actually not microfab, because microfab in our space, there's not really too many clinically approved devices. So our true competitor actually is hand assembly, manual assembly. And so that's people taking, platinum iridium wires and laser soldering them to platinum iridium beads or something like that, balls, whatever they put together, and then putting in an injection mold and injection molding it. That is a very tedious, expensive process, but it's been done for decades, and the reliability of it, the perceived reliability is very high, and the demonstrated reliability is high. And when we, with our customers, we have this issue where we need to de-risk the technology. And so when companies reach out to say, hey, can we work on this? It's usually their next generation of technology. And so we're starting that journey with them from the beginning, where they're open to a lot more risk, because this isn't necessarily a direct component swap out from what we're currently selling. We have limitations. Sometimes there's limitations on cost of labor, especially now post-pandemic. We have a lot of companies that have reached out that are thinking about the future in terms of manufacturing, because they're seeing these labor issues. And when your whole process is based on people being in a room, perhaps hundreds of people actually, in some cases, being in a room looking under a microscope doing a micro welding, and suddenly you lose that, or the labor price goes up, it becomes a huge problem. So for us, it's really joining those partners on the early stage of where they're going in the future and walking with them that. But we try to, because our goal really is to be in the clinical space, we try to restrict and filter out our focus so that it's not so much in the future where you're just looking at animals, although we do work with some partners that are doing animal studies. Still, you're looking at the clinical future. And so what can we do in the clinical space in the future? And so we try to get those companies that already have perhaps an FDA approved device. And so they already kind of have that track record. So most of the technology is already stable. It's already approved. And then when it comes to changing out the lead, it's not such a big hurdle versus the whole.
Okay, yeah. So you like to improve or upgrade a product rather than create it de novo. Yeah, what's, I guess, the process for getting a new electrode or device or neurotechnology design? Do people, I don't know, like people come to you with an idea and you design it for them, and then maybe what's the timeline and cost? And of course, every single one's different, but yeah, generally, what does the process look like?
So it really just depends on the customer. Some people come, and we've had all things. We've had people that come and say, hey, we're trying to figure out what manufacturing platform we're going to use. So we're vetting several different ones. And in some cases, they'll say, can you help us vet them? We'll give you, might be a contract on the vetting side. And then they'll say, well, of course, we want you to be in that. So some things could be on that side. Other things could be companies where have maybe a change in management or ownership, or a CEO change or something like that. And they come in, they say, well, we see what's going on here in terms of labor. We see what's going on here in terms of our restrictions. Okay, here are some devices that we are pretty serious we want to have done. And we got the designs already. Can you produce these designs? And then on that side, the collaborative side comes in with, this is what we can make, this is what we can't make. This is how would you be open to changing the design in this way or that way? And so it really just ranges in terms of how people engage with us. And then you have people that are in very rigid industries, as a lot of medical implant industries can be, right? Sectors. And they are wanting to kind of tip their toe into the space. They've been working on for decades microfabricated solutions. They've been sort of say kind of beating the traditional microfabrication tool set to death, but not quite getting that holy grail of something that can be implanted in the body that's stable and durable. And they say, okay, we heard you have this technology. Let's start on a very early stage. Let's start that. Okay, here are the challenges we know. Every time we try to make it, here's our internal tests that fail. We've had external companies try to make it. Here's where they fail. Okay, can you submit this battery of tests on your technology and let us know if it passes? Okay, then we say, oh, that passes. That's okay. Here's the next thing. These are the medical implant space is, you have people that are on that highly innovative. We want to try something new. We want to do something new. And then you have people that have been in the industry for a long time and they're like, we want to do something new. It's just, we're not built to run. We're built to kind of creep into things.
Yeah, for sure. And it is, of course, it is a big thing that you have to prove that something's safe, that you're going to be putting something in the body that doesn't kill a patient. Good that the FDA is doing a good job and maybe slowing things down sometimes, but being prudent about everything. And so are you talking about like ISO certifications and FDA approvals? Have you helped companies get through that and you can help get them certified as well?
ISO certifications are something we're actually in the process of getting ours right now, building out our certified system. And it's regulated, not regulated, not really required for a company, for us, but it is customary. And so that's on one side, that's all manufacturing, good GMP, all that stuff, right? So that's not as crazy complicated as it might sound, right? There's not really any real burden to that. There's all kind of systems and protocols and things like that. But when you're talking about FDA approval, for us, our goal is we want to be able to provide our customers a good data set so they can make the case, because since we're working on a component of the complete device, we don't actually do our own in-house pre-market approval applications, right? We're not filing for that because we don't sell to the end consumer. But we do need to be able to provide the data and to be able to reassure companies that work with us that we are, when they turn off their final packet, we're not the variant that is sketchy sort of say, or, oh, these guys don't really have, so we have to demonstrate good quality control, repeatability, reliability. Even though we don't directly interface with the FDA, we still have to be a good partner in that way, as many component suppliers end up having to be. And although we are a component supplier, we're a contract manufacturer, doing a part of the device, which is always done in-house for the most part, or outsourced, the whole thing is outsourced and it's still done in-house. Especially in the cochlear space, it's always done in-house. So it's not just a component of the device. It basically is the device. It's the most sensitive part of the device in some areas. And so it puts us in a weird space where it's not as simple as, well, we're a component supplier and la-di-da-di, but it's, you work somewhere in between that land, which is why when I think about the next phases of where we're taking the technology, it's not, can we make an array? It's, can we make it repeatably and reliably? And that's what we're focusing on now in terms of our innovative platform.
Yeah, for sure. And then do you guys do the implantable pulse generator, the computer, the brain of everything too? Or do you just do the electrodes, or do you both of those?
So when we started out, we were doing custom ASICs and things like that. But what we realized was that there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of skill set, a lot of advancements that have been made and can easily be made in that space. Okay. In terms of, there's a lot of people working on it. When we talk about the commercial side and what they're trying to do, yeah, in academia, there's some really great things going on, especially with low power circuits. But when you talk about clinically approved devices, it's not the challenge. The challenge is on the electrode side. Although the circuit sounds very complicated, we got Moore's law, we got, people, we got, it's working in the microfab facility, in some ways it's a lot easier to manufacture an integrated circuit chip than it is to go in and manufacture a MEMS device, especially a MEMS medical implant. Repeatability, reliability, all that's ironed out. And it's just, if I want something smaller, faster, maybe low power is highly innovative. And there's some, again, great work going on, but we weren't going to get into that space. So it didn't make sense for us to do it. Whenever we have gone back and looked at that, that's something we could outsource. So there's lots of partners that we've vetted that if it came up and we needed to do the pulse generator, we could always outsource that component. But there's no partners we can outsource the array to. And that's where we come into play. There's very few people you can outsource a clinical, again, microfab. And we don't care actually if it's microfabricated or not, to be quite honest. I had to learn that as an entrepreneur. I used to, when I came out, microfabrication, MEMStim. Okay, it doesn't matter how it's made. The question is, are we addressing the challenges of high labor costs? So the technology is costly, failures that you have even with hand assembly, because these bulk wires can be rigid and you have these implants fracturing and breaking and a lot of recalls and things like that. And so we're looking at the real technical hurdles. They don't care whether it's microfabricated or 3D printed. They don't care how it's made. We have to sell them on the advantage of the performance and the advantage of the cost to them. And that's the bottom line that they care about. And other than that, they don't really, the industry people don't really care how you make it. They just care, is it meeting our goals?
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. Like nobody cares how it's made. Yeah. So I want to, so do you guys you said you've basically been doing the research and development with companies. Are you guys also prepared to ramp that up into actual production? If a company said, oh, we need 1,000 devices or 100,000 or 100 million devices, is that something that you guys are prepared, or would you give that to somebody else, or how would that work?
So the interesting thing is there's nobody else we can give it to. The exciting thing is that's what we're looking at now. How to ramp up. We're actually looking to raise funds in that area. You mentioned earlier that, and I kind of ignited the conversation that 3D printing is not high throughput traditionally. So we're now designing, with our system, how do we make a high throughput, sort of say microfactory? Not overly complicated in terms of it's going to take 20 years to work out all the kinks and innovations, but how do we make something that we know can work, repeated reliably, but also can put out the appropriate quantity of devices that we need to do a batch with our customers. And so that's where we're at now, really looking more at those manufacturing challenges and less at those kind of one-off prototyping challenges, but really looking at how do we scale up. And we have some really great ideas in that area and actually some really great partners in that area. And we're looking forward to that next phase.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty exciting. Yeah. So I want to talk about, you started this company back in 2011, I think. So more than a decade ago, and you got some grants and everything, but it still seems like it's a small company, just a handful of people. So it seems to be going along. And so I guess, do you have any advice for how you've survived for that long? And most companies don't, they fold within 5 years, but you've done the unbelievable. And so, do you have any advice? And also the grants, I think that was really interesting too.
Yeah, we technically founded in 2011, but I always say this to people that I was an accidental entrepreneur. I was a graduate student in a time where entrepreneurship in the university level was really it was reaching that fever pitch of university suddenly deciding, oh, we need to have degrees in entrepreneurship and the engineering campus should be involved in this. And there was a lot of excitement around it. And I really came up with the concept of MEMStim as a exercise in, I better get some entrepreneurial skill set so I can be marketable in case I want to work at McKinsey and Company or something like that. I was not intending to fully start the company when in those early days when I was thinking about doing things and doing pitch competitions. But the more I pitched, the more I thought about the business idea, the more I talked to actual customers. I went to the I-Corps program. The more I realized hey, there's actually a need and we actually have a pretty good revenue model for meeting that need. But what you really have to convince yourself is, do I want to take on the risk of doing some company where I'm responsible not only for my own salary, my own, other people's, and raising money. And coincidentally, I'd always said that I did not want to be an academic professor because I did not want to be raising money. I just wanted to go work in industry. And then somehow I did a startup and I was like, oh, wow, I could have just gone to academia. But the beauty of the difference for me, because I did do postdoc and flirt with that idea, was the ability to do something that was going to disrupt a market immediately, not 50 years down the road, that I had an opportunity to make an impact there. So all that goes to say, it was not actually until I think 2014, you'll have to forgive me if I'm off a year or something like that, that I really went with it. So 2011, we found it on paper because you did pitch competitions and they said, you want to get this check, you got to have an LLC. And I flirted with the idea, but you don't really start a company, right? The real founders don't show up until you decide, okay, I'm actually going to go raise money. I'm going to hire people. We're actually going to do this we're going to do this full time and for real time. And we're going to go all in. And that wasn't until about, I think, 2014, 2015. I think that's when I applied for an SBIR grant. I applied as as a graduate student before I even got my PhD. That was the first time I applied. Didn't know what I was doing. Second time I applied, probably still didn't know what I was doing, but I ended up getting it anyway. And since then, so I think we got that either 2015 or 2016. I started hiring our first employees. And it was around 2000, it's like maybe a year or two after that, we realized that microfab wasn't going to do it because we were still using traditional microfab stuff. So it was really like 2018, 2019 that we just trashed everything and started over with printing, making our own platinum inks in-house, because every time we tried to outsource that, nothing would work. Nobody would make what we needed. People just weren't making platinum inks that were medical grade and also had to be elastic, and then getting the printers to everything, modifications on them. So that was really when we redid all of the technology. So I guess to answer your question, probably could have been a little bit shorter journey in several ways. One, if I thought more practical as a graduate student, if I hadn't been so committed to what I had to microfab, what I knew, because at some point I just said, if I just let go of everything I know, and I just look at this as a problem, and I was like in high school, how would I solve this? Maybe not the way I'm doing it. And so I would have done that differently. And it's hard to say would I have started sooner? I don't know, because I think you have to go through some things, realize to get passionate enough to make the sacrifice to really do a business. On paper, we've been doing it for a long time. In reality, not as long, but still long. And we have gone the grant route, and we have been very fortunate, especially with our program officer and the review committees in the areas that we've gone to, that they've allowed us to be very practical and very commercial in our grant applications. We haven't had to shoot for the sexy. They've been, as it should be, right? The Small Business Innovation Research Grant. It's not always the case because I've served on these review committees. They've been very focused on the commercial. So it's allowed us to be very focused on the commercial and not have to chase with grant funds sexy ideas that we can only partially complete because they're really 50-year ideas. They're not really immediate ideas. And so we've been very fortunate in our funding mechanism to raise money also through the state level. And they're again, great funding source because they're very much so interested in commercialization. They directly relate to generating jobs and labor. So we've been able to do our funding through those sources. And of course, at some point, especially think about expanding manufacturing, then we'll have to get into larger investment sources. And that's the end game.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, lots of grant opportunities, and that's really cool. And I guess you were sitting on it. So you were doing your PhD between 2011 and 2015, or it got started, or were you doing something else during that time?
No, I graduated with my PhD. Man, the older I get, the crazier my brain gets. I graduated PhD, I think 2010. Could have been 2010, I think. I think the August 2010 is when I graduated. Could have been 2011, I don't know. And then I did postdoc at Michigan, I think for about a year or so. Then I said, let me try academia. But at the time, for personal reasons, I chose Kentucky and was here at Kentucky University, Louisville for a year doing some stuff there. And so I had basically postdoc research scientist jobs in that in-between zone. And the beauty of that actually helped me make my decision to just go straight for the business was that I was able to see, I kept saying, I don't really want to, let me try and avoid this whole risk thing with business. I'll just try to write grants, or since I'm here in academia for things. And I realized that it's just commercialization is one thing and academic research is, and trying to get those two things to merge, it just was not what was needed. And people were still reaching out, companies still reaching out. Are you going to, we heard an article about this company a few years ago can we purchase some things? And so the demand was still there. The demand was there. The will was not. And then the will got on board. And I said, okay, this is actually and I'm glad I did because I could not be happier. It's very stressful, but at the same time, I'm very blessed to be able to do it. Something innovative, something exciting, and something that will impact lives. It's definitely
Yeah, it definitely is encouraging to have positive reviews. And that's how I am with the podcast as well, because essentially this is just speaking into the void. But then I go to real events and people are like, oh, this is great, or I like this. And so that kind of motivates me. And probably the same for you is like after maybe the fifth or 10th person or something like this, I think there is something here and maybe I should pursue it. So that's pretty cool. What have the last 5 years looked like and what do the next 5 years look like? I guess you have talked about this a little bit, but is there something that you're especially excited about? Or maybe some super secret things that you shouldn't be talking about that you want to announce here on the show?
Oh, yeah. The last 5 years is us really been redoing our whole manufacturing process. And the next 5 years, God willing, we will be in the clinical space. We have rethought even partners to get to that journey. And we've been fortunate that we're starting to engage with partners where that journey can be somewhat accelerated. And so we definitely, right now, MEMStim does not have an array that's in clinical use. And so that's our end goal, obviously. But we definitely have some great partnerships that we know will get us there. But for our side, what we have to do, our part in those partnerships, is what we talked about, expanding our manufacturing capabilities so that we can not only make prototypes in small lots, but that we can actually meet the demands of what would be necessary to really become a preferred supplier.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. You'll have a giant facility and doing that. You're based in Kentucky, Louisville. Is there any reason for that? You said you moved there for personal reasons before, but is there any reason that you're staying now, or would you potentially move somewhere else?
I stayed. I said I moved for love, but I stayed for money. Love did not work out. Money's always green. And the state actually matches investment and grant dollars, depending on where your grants come from. And so they're one of the few states that still have, I think, a matching funds program. And at the time that I moved the business here, at the time, especially when we got that first round of funding, they were matching up to, I think, $1 million. And every time you accept which is reasonable, every time you have them match an investment or match the funding or something like that, they have a 5-year clock that starts and says, okay, you'll keep your 51% of your business here in the state. Your employees will be Kentucky residents, all that wonderful stuff. And so that's really what keeps us here in Kentucky. The beauty of Kentucky that most people don't realize is there's a lot of really great facilities here, high-tech facilities, to be quite honest. For the facilities, they have the challenge of trying to get the people to use them. For a startup, we love it because we get to go in and we have run of the best tools that we could possibly need if we ever needed to go. We're still in the microfab space. It's a big difference going from Michigan to a different university because when we go in, you can do whatever you want, whatever time you want to use it for the most part. And the cost is much cheaper. Cost of labor is cheaper here. There's wonderful reasons to be here. They do have the resources. Talent's hard. That's the hardest thing. Talent that is grown here tends to leave. They're trying to work on that issue. It can be hard to get people to come here. Although I will say most of MEMStim's hires have been people that were outside the state of Kentucky. So most of our high-tech hires, so we're talking PhD level or things like that, have come from outside the state, and we were able to attract them here. There's something to be said for that.
Wow, that's really cool. Essentially, you have a 50% off sale all the time by being in Kentucky with the matching funds. That's really cool. Well, Angelique, this has been really interesting. I know I could talk to you forever, but I don't know how much the audience wants to hear about all these details. But is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, I definitely encourage people to join the entrepreneurial race. And for those that say, hey, I want to work in industry, I want to work in academia, that does not exclude them. I do a lot of talks to corporations where entrepreneurship is a thing. So you don't have to force your entrepreneurial spirit. You can be an entrepreneur at the academic level. You can be an entrepreneur inside of a corporation. And so just encouraging people, no matter where their passions lead them, to always have that entrepreneurial spirit of getting their ideas out into the world.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Cool, wonderful.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.